This is an event of great importance. We will hear the points of view of the parliament members, the experts, and the executives of international organisms that will try to give answers to the many questions that this great global challenge as the climate changes. We have the pleasure to let you know that this event is Mr. Andres Rebolledo Smith, Executive Secretary of OLADE, or Latin America Energy Organization. Asia, Europe, and the Arab countries that are here with us. Presidents of Asia, Europe, and the Arab countries that are here with us. Presidents of parliaments, the organizations and institutions that work very close to Parlatino, to the media, to the students who are present with us, and everybody who virtually is with us. Latin America, OLADE, Energy, Carlos Navarro, Minister of Environment of Panama, Robert Martinez Echeverria, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Panama, Deputy Orlando Gonzalez Patricio, President of PARLATINO. A sustainable development that must be equal and respectful to the environment. The transition towards an economy that is low carbon must be inclusive, ensuring that we have the presence of the Oxford University directives. We thank you for your presence here, and we hope it will be a day and a whole week that will be constructive and productive for everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy News.
Political dialogue. Political dialogue. Please let me begin by thanking Palatino for organizing this important event that recognizes the critical role that parliaments play in advancing climate action and promoting just transition. I would like to commend Palatino for its continued leadership in promoting sustainable development and social justice, both in Latin America and the Caribbean and beyond. Your commitment to interparliamentary cooperation is deeply aligned with the mission of the Interparliamentary Union on progress in confronting climate change. Yet, the region continues to witness rising sea levels, increasing extreme weather events, and land degradation. Science tells us the cascading and detrimental impacts of global warming is having on diversity, health, and food security. But we can see this ourselves by directly looking at communities who are facing impossible circumstances due to the climate. It means passing robust and national climate commitments. It means allocating budgets to climate-resilient infrastructure, adaptation, and green innovation. It means holding government no one behind. The energy transition should not be a story of jobs lost, but rather of jobs transformed, created, or made more sustainable. Successful climate action must begin with inclusive, is deeply rooted in the IPU. We are actively supporting parliaments around the world to address climate change in a way that integrates principles of equity and inclusion, so that parliaments is one of the fastest, most affordable ways to slow global warming. For Latin America and the Caribbean, this is especially urgent. If global targets for reducing short-lived climate pollutants are met, the region with strong political will and opens clear opportunities for parliaments to help turn these commitments into action. Through this initiative, we are equipping parliaments with technical knowledge, legal tools at the table. As COP30 will be held in your region later this year, I encourage you all to use this as an opportunity to ramp up national climate action and hold your governments to account. The lead up to COP provides a space to ensure your country's revised nationally determined contributions are not only submitted by their deadline this year, but that they are actionable and robust. Your constituents are depending on you to be their representatives. Let us use this as an opportunity to rewrite the climate story into one of positive transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, we must recognize that climate action is not optional. It is a moral, political, and social justice obligation. PARLATINO's leadership and regional convening power will continue to be instrumental in forging regional climate strategies and ensuring or enhancing cooperation. The clock is ticking, but time is still on our side. If we act with urgency, unity, and courage, we still have a chance to win the fight against climate change. Let us now take the next steps together towards stronger legislation, bolder ambition, and a fairer, greener future for all. The Interparliamentary Union stands ready to support you every step of the way. I wish you fruitful discussions over the next 2 days, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Ahora les invitamos a escuchar al señor.
And now I invite you to listen to Juan Bello, Director and Regional Representative of the United Nations Program for the Environment. Good afternoon, honorable parliaments, Your Excellence, ministers, Mr. Deputy President, General Secretary of the Parliament Union, Martin Chunglong, Andrés Rebolledo Smithman, Your Excellency, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Javier Martínez Asha, and Mr. Rolando González Patricio, President of PARLATINO, ladies and gentlemen. For me, it is an honor and a privilege to address you in the framework of this important political dialogue. I wish to express my dear thanks to the Parliament for their kind invitation. We share a trajectory with this important parliamentary instance, and it is a satisfaction to renovate and strengthen that bond this occasion. This meeting comes in a decisive moment for the region, a moment that demands collective sustainability and, most of all, brave decisions. It calls us to analyze the transformative role of parliaments in climate action and in the building of a fair transition. From the Environment United Nations Program, we salute and we congratulate the creation of the Parliament Climate Change Action for Fair Transition. This is a clear action for the principles of democracy, human rights, and sustainable development and intergenerational justice. Latin America and the Caribbean face a paradigm. We possess great richness and a great potential to lead a fair energy transition, but it also faces historical and deep inequalities and growing vulnerabilities in climate change and a normative gap that compromises compliantly advances in favor of sustainable development. Today, more than ever, Parliament leadership is essential in climate governance. And to ensure focusing rights in the fight against the climate change in the region, we propose 5 main points. First, legislate to guarantee continuity and climate ambitions. It is urgent that all countries of the region to adopt climate change laws that provide legal stability and can transcend government administrations. This law should review goals, effective political participation, and alliances with countries and adapt to the global transition and the new funding mechanism and other multilateral agreements, including biodiversity. Second, the political role is a powerful instrument. Parliaments can ensure that public budgets and development national plans are aligned to the national contributions, promoting accountability amongst its citizens and the international community. Political control is key to prevent delays and promote transparency. Third, be a facilitator of normative consistency. It is vital to standardize sectorial laws such as agriculture, transportation, with climate commitments. A comprehensive legal framework that allows to establish structural reforms that are consistent with sustainable development and that don't contradict the environmental goals and the vulnerability of our communities. Fourth, ensure a fair energy transition. A true transition in Latin America and the Caribbean is not only in technology or focused on emissions. It's a structural transformation of the development model that ensures the protection of labor rights, the generation of green labor, and the active participation of indigenous communities, Afro communities, youth, women, environmental and social standards for critical mining, universal access and affordable access to energy, water, and food, and a fiscal just transition that replaces depending on fossil income without aggravating the public debt. From UNDP, we understand that the transition is not a new way to reproduce in historical injustice. It should be integrated in the financial and social and territorial agenda, protecting the biodiversity and everything that implies this new generation of national contributions. And finally, we consider it is essential to promote inclusive governance. Parliaments are essential spaces to ensure inclusion, promote social dialogue, and protect democracy. A fair transition is only possible if the faces and the voices of those who has been marginalized historically are present and are considered in the decision-making processes. Colleagues and friends, the United Nations Environment Programme reaffirms its calling to the parliaments to become strategic partners of this transformation. You can guarantee political consistency, democratic legitimacy, and fiscal sustainability of the climate action. Every bill, every legislative initiative has to be an opportunity to speed a fair and resilient and positive transition for nature and for people. The Parliament Alliance is a declaration of will, but it's also a working platform. From UNDP, we are happy to support this alliance, reaffirming our availability to support when needed for it to be successful. Let this two-day dialogue strengthen this initiative, project towards COP30, so that the Parliament group can be recognized as a formal group in the framework of the climate change, elevating the institutional role of parliaments in the climate and environmental architecture. From the UN, you have our support, our partnership, and our commitment. Thank you very much, and we greet you and we recognize you for this amazing initiative. Thank you. Thank you very much for your amazing words, Mr. Juan Bello. And now we invite Mr. Andrés Rebolledo Smithmans, Executive Secretary of the Energy Latin American Organization.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone. President of the PARLATINO and former President, thank you for the invitation. Chancellor Juan and Regional Director of UNEP. Also with me today, Fitzgerald Cantero is with me. He will be in a different panel, but he will focus on energy now. But he used to be my colleague for 10 years. So I would like to share with you the landscape of the energy sector in Latin America and the Caribbean. We'll also discuss the role in this effort, the progress we have made, but most of all, what are the challenges? For those who don't know us, the Energy Latin American Organization, OLADE, is an international and intergovernment organization made up of 27 country members, 10 from the Caribbean and the others from Latin America. Our mission is to support energy development. We promote public policy, and we have a mission that has been a part of our DNA since we were created 51 years ago, which is to promote mechanisms and projects and programs towards energy integration in the region. Today, the energy field is decisive. We are in a moment of structural change in geopolitics, in the economy, but most of all in global energy systems, with a shared urgency, accelerating energy transition without sacrificing financial development, equality, and the sovereignty of our people. Our region, like Juan said, has energy characteristic that makes it unique in the global context. Latin America and the Caribbean is the most green area in the world in terms of energy. Actually, in 2024, 70% of the entire energy generation in the region came from renewable sources, clean sources. From this 70%, 40% was water, hydroelectricity. And this is a historical contribution, but it's also a great challenge. Precisely because of the impact of climate change in that resource specifically. Some numbers can tell us about the potential for growth in terms of renewable energy penetration in our region. And actually, Latin America and the Caribbean, we have only exploited 16% of the air resources, 20% of water resource, and only 2% of solar resources that we have in our region. We contribute as a region, and this is data that we usually don't highlight, but today we have a global stakeholder, Brazil, and we build with a 27% of the biofuel production of energy in the world, 10% of oil, and 25% of the global production of critical minerals for clean technology and for the transition industry. Meaning there's no energy transition at the global level without the contribution of our region. We are, as a region, that is the solution. However, we have great challenges Our region continues to face high levels of inequality in access to energy and access to clean energy, vulnerabilities in face of climate change, funding difficulties that make it difficult for sustainable development, and on top of that, disruptive technologies. And actually, as a consequence of this landscape and these numbers, our region contributes approximately 8% of all emissions of greenhouse gases. What's interesting is that from this 8%, less than half, less than 4%, come from the energy sector. If you look at this number in the global level, energy represents around 65 and 70% of all emissions. That's why we reaffirm that we are a region that is a solution. Latin America and the Caribbean has the conditions to position itself as a global reference in the energy transition. But this potential can only become a reality if we progress together with a common energy agenda. For that, we need more integration and a shared vision. It's the moment for our energy production to stop being a promise and become a catalyzer in growth. So from OLADE, with that purpose, we are proposing to make progress together with a common agenda that includes these 2 points: an inclusive energy transition and regional investment in renewable energy, promoting resilient infrastructure and sustainable financing. Financing is key. Energy sovereignty is understood as the capability of our people to use their own resources and go towards something central. In our region, it is required to take a step with political decision, and that is planning a regional energy transition so that our regulators and authorities, when they design their planning policies of their energy sector, not only think of themselves, but think of the relationship with our neighbors, and therefore promote energy integration. So in the face of global energy challenges, the solution should be collective, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. Therefore, from OLADE, we are driving a project that we are expecting that in the next few years will become a reality, so that there's no device in the region that comes from negotiating an energy integration treaty, which will make our region leader in this agenda. With all of these challenges, and even though there has always been a legal framework and regulation to be key in all countries, today is more essential than ever. That's why these meetings that aim to have collaboration, it is more urgent. Legislation not only should ensure fair fees or quality service and appropriate competence frameworks. It is now required a regulation that facilitates technology innovation, that promotes sustainable investment, that is decentralized, and that ensures a fair transition. We have to have priorities in the next two strategic lines. Latin America has made progress in the incorporation of renewable energy. However, as we all have experienced in the last weeks and months, we have seen complex energy blackouts, not only in Latin America, but also on the other side of the Atlantic. So Latin America demands a transformation with a reposition of the urgency and the sovereignty and energy security. And this is a growing challenge. Therefore, electrifying consumption is an essential challenge. There are some interesting numbers that we should consider because it tells us about the bigger picture of electrifying this consumption. According to the studies from OLADE, by the year 2035, our region will need 3% more electrical energy, 5% more for data centers, for AI use, and 9% more if we want to continue developing our green industry. This requires a huge amount of investment, so by 2035, only in renewable energy, our region will require $400 billion in order to achieve this ambitious climate scenario. And secondly, the solution to our energy challenges cannot be national. Regional energy integration, whether it is electricity, regulatory, or all of its manifestations, is still something unfinished. Legal frameworks have a key role to standardize this, facilitating interconnections and building reliable markets at the regional scale. Let me give you an example. We not only require more infrastructure and interconnection, but we need to generate the appropriate legal framework to use what we already have. In Latin America, from the existing electricity infrastructure, from gas is 23% and electricity 5%. So what we have, we only use a quarter of its potential. Therefore, in that context, the legal framework has to move forward with a shared vision. And that is why this meeting is so important. In summary, we need laws with anticipatory capabilities that can give us in advance the actions not only of the private sector but also the parliaments and the legislation that allows these changes with a strategic vision and with a sense of reality, but also with a commitment for the sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor Smithmans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smithman. And next, we'll receive Mr. Salvador Aviat from the Mayor's Office of Panama.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to join the protocol greetings to everyone in the Parliament, distinguished panelists, authorities, and special guests. Welcome everyone to the beautiful city that with a lot of honor, and we have the representative that has been helping us since day one for the benefit of the environment. I want to share with you an interesting data that makes me very proud, but it's also a great responsibility. Panama is one of the 3 countries in the world that is recognized as carbon negative. 3 countries joined by a strong truth. It is possible to live in harmony with the environment. We are not only a part of the global solution for the environment, but we are an example. Being carbon negative means that we absorb more carbon emissions than the ones that we generate. And that's no coincidence. That is a political decision, a technical decision, and a citizen's decision. Today I have the honor to address you on behalf of the Mayor of Panama, Mr. Mayer Misrachi, to reaffirm our commitment with three essential pillars: sustainability, urban resilience, and most of all, a just transition that benefits all. From the municipality of Panama, we have traced a clear, measurable route with real impact. We know that urbanization, especially with native species, is not an aesthetic luxury. It's a tool for mental and public health, for green regeneration and equality. Every tree that we plant means we have cleaner air. It is an act of environmental justice. Every greenhouse represents jobs, biodiversity, and citizens training. But we go beyond. Our vision of a city integrates green infrastructure, sustainable mobility, revegetation under the principles based on the nature as inclusive engines. From the Mayor's Office of Panama, we have achieved real results in the last few months. We have planted more than 15,000 native trees around Panama. 60 out of those trees were planted here in the Parlatino in the area of Albrook. We have 2.6 million square meters of green spaces, greenhouses with the goal of achieving 250,000 plants per year, a network of 20 recycling stations that recover more than 20 tons per year, a program for cleaning rivers and waste collection. We launched a program called Cochinos PTY to get rid of urban landfills and ensure the community participation. These efforts not only have an environmental impact, but also social and financial impact. Urbanization increases the value of property, decreases health costs, and promotes energy savings. Investing in green is not only looking out for the planet, but also looking out for the lives of people. But we have to be clear. None of this is sustainable without a legal framework. We recognize the key role of parliaments, such as this one, PARLATINO, for the creation of public policies that can ensure budgets, incentives, and citizens' participation. Today, climate change is not an environmental issue, it's a rights issue. It is the great challenge of our era, but it's also a unique opportunity to reimagine our cities with equality, environmental justice, and a vision for the future. That fight not only takes place in forums, but in neighborhoods, squares, and in every decision we make daily as local governments. On behalf of the Mayor, Maya Mizrahi, we reassure that the Municipality of Panama is ready to partner with you. We can achieve greener and more resilient cities. We can be the change that our cities need. The planet and history is watching us. Let's do it right. Let's do it together. Let's do it now. Thank you very much, and may God bless you the wisdom to lead all cities of our countries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Aviat. And now we want to invite Your Excellence Javier Martinez Acha Vázquez, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Panama, for his opening remarks.
Good afternoon, Your Excellence, honorable Parliament members, distinguished guests, ambassadors, friends. I promise I will be brief, just as Parliament breaks are. And don't worry, I am not here to ask for your vote. But yes, this is an important forum, an important summit. We have no planet B. We only have this planet. Therefore, every second that we are ignoring the issues about climate change, we will pay with lives. May you all be welcome. My predecessor, in the name of the mayor and, of course, name of our dear president, Jose Raul Molino, and of all the Panamanian people, I extend my respectful greeting and warm greeting to all of you and representatives of the parliaments of the world that are today with us in this day as a commemoration of the Environment Day, Global Environmental Day. It's my privilege to receive you, host you all in Panama, which is a place for encounters, for dialogue, for biodiversity, and a constant commitment with always having present the protection of the planet. This date is not just another date on the international calendar. This should be celebrated every day of the year. This day is an urgent call to the consciousness, to action, and to responsibility, which is a shared responsibility, because the environmental challenge does not distinguish frontiers, borders, ideologies, or levels of development, and it calls all of us everywhere. And in spite of that, is this diversity of our realities where the key to build real solutions and fair solutions lies. The planet will survive. Frankly, we don't know that yet. My mother, who is from the country, I am very lucky to have her alive, from a place called Cocle, a small town called Haguito in Cocle province. This is why I always demand to put the Vasquez in my last names, and because she watches me when I'm on TV, and when it says Javier Martinez Acha, then she complains. She says, was I not part of that? So please, would you please add the Vasquez, which is her last name? My mother used to say, as someone from the countryside, that I don't remember exactly, this has been some years ago, we don't inherit the earth from our parents or forefathers. We take it, we borrow it for next generations. And she told me this when around the 60s or the 70s, when I had school vacation in Haguito. But Panama, from our position as a country committed to peace, diplomacy, and sustainable development, we support firmly every initiative that aims to guarantee an equal and balanced environment for the next generations. It's not just an optional task, but an ethical obligation with humanity and with life itself. Today, when I reflect upon the challenges on the climate crisis, an essential question arises. The climate is changing. Are we? Today, we face a global emergency. In Panama, we have lived through it. We have had to relocate an island of native brothers and sisters to inland, and we have many other islands that are threatened by the rise in sea level. But yes, the solutions must be just and efficient. They must come from the local, from the cooperation, and from a profound comprehension of our differences and responsibilities, which are shared responsibilities. If we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves. In that framework, Panama stands firm in its compromise towards a responsible commitment with an ethical and political agenda. As a nation, our history has been intimately linked to the paths of sustainable developments. We have participated with a clear voice in the forums, in the summits of the earth, in the multilateral negotiations about biodiversity, in the conferences about the oceans, and of course in the COPs for climate change, with proposals that are oriented towards environmental justice and international cooperation. Climate change doesn't understand about ideologies. Climate change is not a prediction, it's a reality. But beyond the forums, beyond the summits, Panama also speaks from its geography, from our soil, one of the biggest lungs, Darien National Park, which has been declared by the UNESCO World Heritage. This vast extension of rainforest has a richness of fauna and endemic and a fundamental reservoir for Latin America. To protect Darien means not only to protect Panama, but to defend a vital system that serves to the global equilibrium. Solution to the climate issue cannot be thought without the main role of the global south. We cannot have ecological justice without defining the basic differences and common points. We cannot have a just transition if we don't take into consideration the realities and rights of the people that have contributed less to the crisis, but that suffer more their impact. Its impact. It's essential that climate justice must be at the center of all global strategy, recognizing the historical gaps and the aspirations, legitimate aspirations of development of our peoples. This is why we celebrate with enthusiasm the initiatives of the Latin American and Caribbean Parliament, PARLATINO, and I recognize the continuous effort, not only now, of my friend, and I would say even my teacher, Elias Castillo. I'm 61 years old. He must be around there, but he was always a political teacher for me. Thank you, Elias. The inaction of all of us, it's a decision, but that would be very costly, has a high cost. We celebrate, Mr. President, with a lot of enthusiasm, the initiative of this Parliament, Latin American Parliament, Latin American and Caribbean Parliament, while gathering this political dialogue titled The Parliaments in the Climate Action and Just Transition. This space not only honors the commitment of the legislative body towards the environment, but it also creates a concrete path in the commitments towards next COP30. Our president said this on Friday in the AES summit. Panama confirms its commitment to the environment. The signature of the Parliamentary Alliance for Climate Action and Just Transition will mark a milestone of articulation, coherence, and multilateral action. Here, the role of the parliament cannot be replaced. The parliament institutions not only legislate, they represent the voice of our societies. They crystallize the compliance of the commitments and the international goals and national goals as well. Allow me to highlight also that this space will also have a very high level conference from climate change to sustainable development, risks and opportunities for the global south, by Dr. Ramon Peach Madruga, Director of the Center for Study of Global Economy, CN, and Vice President of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. His leadership, experience, and vision will be, without a doubt, an inspiration for everybody here present in this room. Honorable Parliament members, when you go back to your countries, the message is clear. Climate action cannot wait. It cannot be divided neither between north and south, between the upper or lower streets, between economy or environment, between urgent and important. Either we act all together or we fail altogether. All of us. Now it's time to join our voices to create consensus and transform the good intentions into binding commitments. Ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, Ms. Ambassador of the Republic of China, my friend, your presence here is not only a sign of commitment, it's also a shared promise. A promise of action with vision, with responsibility, intergenerationally, and with the braveness that represents to transform the present in order to protect the future. From Panama, we say out loud, here you have a firm ally, because to protect the planet, I repeat, it's not an option. It's the only justified way that we can live to the ones that come after us. I have 4 kids, and I hope I one day will have grandchildren, and maybe with I will be even be seeing the sons and daughters of my sons and daughters with the advances of medicine, and I hope I will be able to see a better planet than the one we have today. Panama will continue to be an advocate of and promoter of the dialogue among the countries, because taking care of the earth is a place where we also can play the dignity of human life. Thank you very much. I represent President Molino, and my name, please make it clear, Javier Martinez Acha Vasquez. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chancellor. Mr. Chancellor, I would like to tell you that here in our script, it's very clear. Javier Martinez Acha Vasquez. So tell your mother that we love her very much. Big round of applause. Now we invite Rolando Gonzalez Patricia, Deputy President of PARLATINO, to direct his message. Good afternoon. Without a doubt, we live in times where time is a critical variable. Therefore, the authorities and will liberate for the strict protocol of naming them one by one. But you will allow me to thank each and every one of you for being here, for coming from where you all have come. Some of you even a third country, some of them were in another international event in Lima, not less important than this, but all of us sharing the same vocational service and for opportunities as well. Here we could have many more. In fact, we could be missing 75, 100 million people from the earth, but we advocate for their cause, and we represent them not only for members of our country, but the rest of humanity, because that's the essence of the spirit that some of the interventions were mentioning before. It is a path and a solution for all, or it will not be possible at all for any of us. The Pact for the Future, a consensus in the United Nations, marks an important path and defends like multilateralism, important principles, but others are the urgency of climate action. With that spirit of acting, of transforming, that's how from the political dialogue South 2024 that was developed in Rio, organized by CIPO platform and other Brazilian organizations and international cooperation, we dare to launch this idea that starts to materialize thanks to the goodwill and the support of all of you. What is this political dialogue? Well, it's a reflection, it's a deliberation about the place of the parliaments in climate action and just transition. We are convinced, like we have said before, that the parliaments can do even more for stopping global climate change and offering mitigation for climate change, and more than anything, ensuring a just transition, not leaving anyone behind. And that we must do with what we know how to do better: legislate, control, and represent. And to really represent, committed with the ones we are representing, so we can have justice, and of course we will have standards and norms that can even step ahead the reality. We are convinced that this we must do with consciousness, and we say not only thinking about today but also or the near future. It is a task committed with the destiny of humanity, and this is why this dialogue, this alliance, is also an exercise of humanitarian vocation. If we are able to materialize that expectation, the horizon that some of these interventions have sketched, we will be, as a parliament, be able to put in a cog, a piece that is missing for the climate global crisis and climate management. And we'll be able to do that with the satisfaction of being able to exercise the responsibility that the common citizens have, and that would be the way to really measure its scope. And why? How does this idea of this alliance in Latin America arises? First of all, because we are all humans, but also because of the tradition, the way we think, and the commitment that our region has with these topics. There is a very interesting idea that comes from 1891 from Jose Marti, when in that amazing, in the beginning of the 20th century, said there is no clash between civilization and barbaric actions, but between the false knowledge and nature. From there, it was less advanced in Latin American thought, and we've had a long tradition of environmentalism and humanism that has been very well founded. Allow me to remind you who recently passed by, Pope Francisco, who precisely was advocating of our common house, because we don't have a planet B. He was advocating for this, like our friend Martinez Acha was saying. And obviously, it's also a call to action to preserve the rights of all the humans, especially the ones that are most vulnerable. And of course, he also called us to change that consumption and production and consumption ideology, and that's part of the transformation of justice that we must make. And when Elias and I had a conversation with Pope Francisco last October, one of the topics that caught more his attention was what we explained with the projections of our Palatino, what we were executing in climate matters. And with those important figures that have advocated for this topic, we could mention without a doubt a great man of the South, Pepe Mujica, who did a lot of things. But when he arrived to government, he had 4 pillars in his government, and one of them was the pillar of environmentalism. That commitment with politics, with society, and with the transformation and taking care of our environment, that is an example of being coherent. And let me conclude this tour with an artist, Sebastián Salgado, who recently passed away as well. Extraordinary photographer from Brazil that marked a chapter in the history of photography. And not only because he did environmental photography, but because in the last few years of his life, which were not a few, he dedicated to use the lands of his family that was a desert. He invested the resources in replanting and change the conditions and making that desert bloom again. And that's an example of action, inspired, of course, in those great people. We can, as parliament members, we cannot do less. And let me extend myself a little bit more. What we're doing is not only for the benefit of nature or the benefit of our health or for future generations. We are also doing this with the correct climate action, a contribution, an important contribution, at least that's how we see the Alliance project in advocating for multilateralism and defense of a better world and in defense of a more democratic environment. But look, something that's really necessary to solve, and it's one of the bridges in this management, is that we also have a scope or a focus that advocates for peace from the advocate for climate change. This is why the Universal Letter of Peace to People and the Planet, that International Parliament for Tolerance and Peace last summer approved in Cambodia. If we go to the data, one of the things that we must do is to legislate upon basis of scientific evidence. Tells us how much of a footprint the armies generate and pollution as well. Some say that 5.5% of global emission of greenhouse gases effect have to do with military equipment in conditions of peace. We are not talking about armies confronting against each other. And we also must speak about areas dedicated to defense. Around 6% of the planet is dedicated, and many are in protected areas because they have determined species and life conditions that only exist there. Panamanians know this very well because this was a military occupied territory, and we can feel that in a very direct way. And lastly, because the military expenses are also an enemy of social well-being and of the resources that we can reinvest for climate change. So we demand for coherent policies. We are also collaborating towards a path of peace. So I want to thank you for your presence here, and this event we will raise this voice towards COP30, and obviously here we can only thank you and maintain our commitment to not stop our actions until we can have good actions for the future generations.
Thank you, Mr. Patricio Gonzalez. And before we farewell the authorities, we invite you to follow the protocol for the official picture of this event.
Buenas, por favor.
Hello, and please, so let's make the most of the presence of our Chancellor. Please stand up to this side so we can all be in the picture. Please move to this side. Please, let's move to this side of the room. Thank you. Gregorio, please, on this side.
María. Sí, tienen que subir.
You have to step up. Please step up. Can we move together a little bit closer? Please get closer. Can we move forward to this side, please? Please take a step up. Please get closer. Yes, please.
¿Cómo estamos? Por favor, ¿me acompañan por acá?
En 2 minutos vamos a...
In 2 minutes, we'll begin today's conference. In 2 minutes, we'll begin today's conference.
Ya lo dije. Les pedimos
Please go back to your seats so that we can begin today's conference. Go back to your seats so we can begin today's conference.
Voy a esperar un poquito para volverlo a repetir.
Después de esta está mi presentación, ¿no? Y yo le doy 1 y ya aparece el...
Les pedimos, por favor, ir tomando sus asientos.
Please go back to your seats so we can begin with the conference. Please go back to your seats.
Comienzo. Ok. Bien, vamos a seguir con la agenda de...
So let's continue with today's agenda, and we can begin with the conference, Global Challenges and Regional Solutions. Latin America and the Caribbean in face of the climate crisis and biodiversity, by Mr. Ricardo Estrada, the main economist of the Socioeconomic Investigations of CAF. He's an MBA from the University of Paris, MBA in Public Policy from the University of Chicago. His interests of research are mainly education and development. Before he joined CAF, he was a fellow of the European Institute. He has been a consultant for the World Bank and the International Fund of Agricultural Development and the Population Council. Mr. Estrada, the floor is yours. Hello and good afternoon. To me, it is an honor to be here with you today and share with you the report that we created in the Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, CAF. And it is a pleasure to support this meeting in the Parliament in the framework of this partnership between our institutions. Very often we hear about the crisis of the climate change, but also about the crisis of the loss in biodiversity. But in the middle of this report, there's a message that says that climate change and biodiversity loss are the same crisis. And this is true, especially for Latin America and the Caribbean. Today's report has been structured around 4 questions. What are the effects of climate change? What are the effects of biodiversity loss? How is human action producing climate change and biodiversity loss? And finally, what many of policies can the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean adopt to face this crisis? And I highlight the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean because this report is focused on the region, for the region. Let's begin with climate change. How is it affecting us? Latin America and the Caribbean is a region of high exposure and vulnerability to climate change due to its geographical position and socioeconomic conditions. So the risks of climate change are endless, and we detailed those in the report, so I encourage you to download it. Today I will focus on 2, just to give you an example. First, extreme events. Climate extreme events are one of the manifestations with the most severe consequences for the population. Every year in the region, more than 7 million Latin Americans and Caribbeans are affected by tropical typhoons, floods, droughts, fires, and heat waves. Unfortunately, climate extreme events are becoming not only more frequent, but more severe. And this increases the amount of the population affected, but also the magnitude of the financial losses. Amongst the extreme climate events are heat waves. And in this map, I want to show you the cities of Latin America and the Caribbean that in the decades of the 80s suffered from a heat wave. It's highlighted in yellow. If it was an extreme heat wave, it will be highlighted in red. As you can see, in the 80s, 37% of cities in the region had some sort of heat wave, but only 5% was extreme. However, in more recent years, this has changed significantly. As you can see, the amount of dots is greater, but also the color of the dots. It's getting more and more red. If you see recent years, 60% of the cities of the region suffered at least one heat wave. So 6 out of 10. Now that's the majority. And amongst those, 14% suffered from an extreme heat wave. So meaning that the cities that experienced an extreme heat wave in the region multiplied by 3. But what does it mean more than it being more hot? Well, it has severe consequences in the citizens' health, especially elders, children, population with chronic diseases, people that have no access to air conditioner. So this means that it has high effects on social inclusion, but there are also financial consequences. It decreases the amount of productive time at work and the productivity of the sectors that are developed outdoors. Agriculture and construction has severe decrease in productivity due to heat waves. Beside extreme climate events, there are other manifestations due to climate change that are related to constant changes, frequent changes that we can see more and more, and it has other consequences. Projections tell us about these long-term changes that temperatures will continue to grow. The raining will be less predictable, and aridity will be and dryness will be unpredictable as well. Let's see what happens with dryness. This is the surface of the region by 2014. As you can see, 13% of South America's surface was considered arid, and more or less 40% the Caribbean and Latin America. And we projected some numbers for the future. So let's see a future that is business as usual. We continue increasing greenhouse gases emissions. As you can see, as time passes, the proportion of the territory that becomes arid will increase significantly. The projection by 2100 says that in South America will achieve at 20% in an arid surface. In the Caribbean, the change is dramatic. It's 81%, and Central America, 55%. But what does it mean when we say more arid? That means there's a fall in agricultural productivity, and that has two clear consequences. One, there's a risk in food security of the population, specifically the most poor, the families that rely on family production for self-consumption. It is common in Central America, Mexico, and the Andean countries. And there's another issue, one of the best potentials for growth in the region. We have high agricultural potential. And as you know, 90% of the agricultural surface of the region relies on rain. So changes in the rain patterns and aridity will affect directly. In the report, like I stated, we emphasize in many more effects. Effects to infrastructure, in water availability, for production and for human consumption, or even hydro energy production, and also the effects to the ecosystem. Today, because of time limitations, I won't get into all of that. So let's move on to the second question. How is biodiversity loss affecting us? First, to talk about biodiversity loss and how it affects us, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have to recognize that we are a region where we already said that we have extraordinary biodiversity. 6 out of 17 considered countries to be mega biodiverse is in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that is a celebration. But the celebration cannot cannot last longer because we are in the middle of a crisis. Let me give you an example. One way to lose biodiversity is how the surface of the region is changing and how the natural coverage is changing. Natural coverage or semi-natural coverage are those that have low impact. If we go to the 1800s, as you can imagine, it's basically the entire region that is covered naturally or semi-naturally. However, today the story is different. As you can see, as time passes, we lose this natural and semi-natural coverage to use it for men. And this loss increases rapidly in the beginning of the 20th century. Now, annually, we're losing the coverage of the territory of Panama. That is the size that we lose every year. And that is degrading the ecosystem. Still, we are a power. The issue is how can we preserve and regenerate what we already have. Nowadays, basically only half of the territory in South America is natural or semi-natural. Obviously, if we go to the countryside of each country, there may be variations. So when ecosystems are degraded and when we lose biodiversity, the ecosystem services are affected. These are the services that nature provides for people, and these are irreplaceable supplies for our life and for our development, including financial development. Let me give you some examples about these ecosystem services, and I'm going to emphasize on the topic of this meeting, and it's the ones related to climate change. First of all, as you know, the ecosystems, especially the forests, absorb carbon from the atmosphere and they deposit it in the soil and the biomasses. So the forests of the region absorb a lot of carbon. They absorb 15% of the entire global carbon. This is a huge contribution. This is a public asset from our region to the rest of the world and for the mitigation of climate change. However, not everything is good news. Our forests are very little productive when capturing carbon. Why? Because of the forest degradation. It's so degraded that it cannot capture as much carbon. If we could manage better our forests, this contribution for the world and Latin America would increase even more. So when it comes to adaptation, the ecosystems can help us in multiple ways to face the effects of the climate change. One of these have to do with mangroves. There's an abundance of mangroves in Panama, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Mangroves are a natural barrier that protects the population from floods. It decreases 60% of the waves produced by typhoons, 31% of the waves produced by winds. It protects annually 1 million people and $12 million in property. So when we harm our mangroves, we are exposing ourselves to floods. We are risking our people and our property. So the ecosystem services are not only important for climate change, they are important for many more areas of human activity, including financial activity. One example is pollination. Natural pollinizers, including our friends bees, provide an important service for agriculture. They pollinize avocado, coffee, vegetables, even industrial crops like soy. So economists are calculating that 30% of the financial value of species that they pollinate is due to their activity, which is completely natural. So if we destroy the ecosystem where these bees live, we will be affecting directly the agricultural production. We will be producing less. Once again, in the report, we do a more detailed analysis of these several ecosystem services. But today, because of time, we won't get into all of it. So we already talked about how we are being affected by climate change and biodiversity loss. As we know, because of its origin, human activity generates climate change. And that is mainly due to the use of fossil fuels and deforestation. Those two produce greenhouse gas effects. So having a precise diagnostic about how we generate these emissions is very important if we want to direct mitigation policies. A strong message we give in this report is that our production matrix for emissions generation is different than other regions. If we see Latin America, almost 60% of our emissions come from the agriculture sector and others who use the soil. And another percentage is deforestation, and the other 2 percentages are agricultural practices such as rice production, fertilization, livestock farming, etc. So the energy supply is only 13%, transportation only 11%, and then I'll show you how it is around the world. You will see that it's very different. In our case, energy supply is lower because of 2 reasons. One, it's because our electricity matrix is very clean. We have a lot of hydro electricity generation, and also because we use less energy. But if we compare to other developed countries, we see that the matrix is completely different. In their case, basically all emissions come from transportation, industry, building, and energy supply. This is mainly because of production of hydrocarbons. They don't deforest, and their contribution to agriculture is very low. This means that if you want to mitigate and you live in Europe, your plan is called energy transition. But if you live in Latin America and the Caribbean, you need to do an energy transition, but also something else, because it's not all like developed countries. So how is human activity generating biodiversity loss?
It's through various channels, but the main one is the change of soil use or land use. Mainly, as I said, 55% of the surface of the region nowadays has an anthropic, mainly human use. But what do we use it for? That's a question as well. We use it now for ourselves. What do we use it for? This is what we want to show on this map. Basically, 41% is the agricultural sector. It may either be for cattle breeding or for agriculture itself, and 4% for living. And this varies a lot because smaller countries geographically smaller, they have more importance. In some places it's more important the crops, the cattle breeding, but this is approximate. This is the standard in the region. So in general, what remains beyond the exact number is the importance of the agricultural sector for the use of the land. Now let's talk about policies. Climate change, the consequences of biodiversity loss is a global problem. This is nothing new. This arrived to all of the countries, and all of the countries must face it. That's true, but it's also true that this arrived at very different times in our development. processes. There are countries where this arrived at a moment of a great economical development, and other countries, more like ours, where this arrived at a moment where we have not solved the traditional challenges of development, to say it this way. It was, look, in the last 60 or 70 years that America has developed itself less than the global center has not solved the social inclusion issues. Although there have been advancements in the last decade, we are the most unequal region, and in some the rates of poverty are still very high. So this, let's say, traditional ways of development, however, we haven't solved yet, and we now face new challenges. So this forces us to be trying to solve the previous ones while we're trying to solve the climate issues at the same time. This is something that we want to address in the report. To react in face of climate change will require resources. And these resources, investment, mitigation, adaptation, many times it will require to take difficult decisions in the countries to assign to different objectives the resources. And this will be the task of the authorities in each country, depending on their own realities. And within the report, we see that in this scenario, there are different policies that do have synergy, meaning that they allow to move forward not only in the environmental component, but also in the economical aspect as well. And these policies and considerations that are strong words in the report are around the synergies. So we have about 5 messages or main points that we think are priorities. First is to prioritize adaptation. The effects of climate change nowadays in Latin America and the Caribbean are clear and undeniable. And all of the scientific evidence indicates that the risks will only increase. So if we don't react, no one will react for us. There's no alternative. Now, since it seems that from the data that I showed, the effects of climate change are not only at a regional level, but even local. They can vary a lot depending on the geography and the socioeconomical conditions. So the strategy to create an adaptation strategy, each country will need to have a very precise diagnosis of areas, sectors, and populations that have been affected in order to propose their answers to the crisis. We highlight that the adaptation offers a lot of synergy opportunities, particularly in social inclusion and economical growth. Why? In general, the populations that are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change are also the populations that are most vulnerable in the socio-economical aspect as well. Therefore, if we don't work on this front, we can broaden even more the inequality in areas that are already very unequal, like ours, but also economical growth to generate infrastructure. Well, not only infrastructure, but resilient regions with give conditions that give incentive to investment and therefore economical growth. In specific situations that we highlighted in the report have to do with solutions based on nature, practices of resilient practices, adaptation, and to manage prevention and risk management for disasters. These are more specific that we analyzed in the report. Advantages that we highlighted with a high potential of cost-benefit balance. Now, afterwards, to be able to comply with the Paris agreements and to prevent what can be a climate catastrophe that could change life as we know it, we need to reduce emissions. There's no doubt about that neither. And to attain the goals of the Paris agreement and within the rise in temperature, 1.5 degrees versus the pre-industrial age. All of the countries must contribute independently of who has been generating more. So we must comply with these commitments or compromises. Somehow we must mitigate for these emissions, and that includes us all. Something that in the report we highlighted was that it's important to think how to phase this mitigation, how to do it in the best possible way. One important thing is to recognize, again, this varies between countries, but in most countries of the region, the role of deforestation. And here it's a priority, it seems, to stop deforestation. So it's showing 75% of the surface we utilize for the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector is important because from there we get the food that we eat. And everything indicates that we will continue to eat food. So from somewhere we need to supply that demand. What we see in the report is the importance of improving the agricultural productivity. Latin America and the Caribbean has improved its productivity if we look into the numbers of the last 50 or 60 years, but it's not enough. Why? Because the growth in production has continued when we have broadened that borders. The challenge is not to increase that gap or bridge in the agricultural, but increasing the agricultural productivity. That's the message. And as we were saying also, the region has geographical advantages that are unique for the production of renewable energies, particularly solar and wind energy. We must take advantage of this geographical position, and also that thanks of the investments, the prices of these technologies has decreased a lot. They have become competitive in some places, even with prices below fossil fuels. And finally, we must balance the price of hydrocarbons with the social cost of carbon, with the social cost of consuming them. In the world at large, there is a debate about implementing these taxes on carbon, use of hydrocarbons, payment for the use of these hydrocarbons, because this extra tax helps me cover the social costs that I'm not paying in some other way. So for that, we must do a reform for subsidies. We don't tax the hydrocarbons. We subsidize the use of hydrocarbons. So we maybe must think how to reformulate these subsidies or grants, but we need to do it somehow. A third priority that we mentioned, and this again has to do not only with the intrinsic value of the ecosystems, which is huge, and its impact in climate change, but the sustainability of our economical growth, and that has to do maintain and regenerate our capital that comes from nature. And the leader in solution we can organize into, on one hand, the regulation solutions, which are the natural protected area. 22% of the surface of the earth and the seas of Latin America and the Caribbean are protected areas. It's the biggest proportion in the world. We are leaders in this. However, we still have work to do. Not only we must declare it as protected area, but we must ensure that this protection is, in fact, efficient. And we must do this with indigenous and native population and other actors that are key in balancing these objectives of conservation and local development. And afterwards, there is a series of policies that look out to formulate mechanisms in the market to generate incentives for conservation. And here again, the region is leader, especially the payments for their ecosystem protection. For example, where the users of the water pay the landlords or landowners that preserve those conservations and increase the production of water to the cities. In Central America, specifically, has shown a lot of leadership in the implementation of these programs, and the tendency shows that when this is well implemented and well designed, they are very effective. And finally, Brazil is a very important case where the industry is committed not to acquire products that have been obtained from deforestation in certain areas. This is very important, for example, in the Amazon for preservation of these areas. And the fourth highlight here is to take advantage of the opportunities. The developed countries are a step ahead, but they are becoming more and more electrical. That electrification will create demand for a lot of services and utilities where the region has comparative advantages. One of them is the electrification needs what's called critical minerals, and many of the countries in the region has a lot of lithium and copper, for example, just to give two examples. And there are other countries that have natural gas, huge reservoirs that go beyond petroleum and carbon, oil and carbon, so this can be used as well as sources of energy. And the carbon bonds, for example, we can receive resources that will help us to preserve our forests. And of course, within these strategies, it's fundamental to guarantee that the local communities will be the ones that will be benefit from this. Finally, and I think there is no better place to speak about this objective, but this is the coordination, national coordination, regional coordination. We have history of common interests that could make us work in a closer way for international negotiations. It will help us have a better voice. We need to work together and make our voices heard. For example, most of the international financing is directed for mitigation of climate change, diminishing the emissions, even though we already said that for Latin America and the Caribbean is very important, the adaptation and preservation for climate change techniques. Our policies, we probably want to have more financing, international financing for these goals. Climate change and loss of biodiversity is a global problem. Its solutions, we call this regional solutions, but I think they're even more local, right? It will vary a lot depending on the context and the needs and decisions of the local populations. I think the report, we hope, will be useful to present different alternatives, and we hope that you will consider it as such. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Estrada, for your valuable input and relevant data that you give us from the CAF. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time to have our first panel. The function of legislation in face of climate change. This is the first panel will be moderated by Deputy Juan Martin Rodriguez, Secretary General of PARLATINO. Doctor in Social Sciences of the Republic of Uruguay, President of the National Party, Executive Secretary of the List 71 since 2020, National Representative elected for the legislation 2020-2025, and re-elected for legislation 2025-2030. Also Secretary General of PARLATINO on 2 periods from 2020 to 2024 and 2024 to 2026. You may go ahead. Thank you very much. Well, we will begin with this first panel. We will start inviting our panelists to join us here at the stage. And as we start passing the floor, we'll introduce each one of them. The panelists are Mr. Juan Pablo Letelier from the Institute of Governance of PARLATINO, Luis Alpiz, Director of Red Cross and Red Crescent Moon, and Fitzgerald Cantero, Director of the Latin America Organization of Energy, OLADE. Also, we will have Deputy Luis Morlota Rios, Vice President of the Education Committee, Culture, Science, Technology, and Environment of the National Assembly of the popular power of Cuba. These are our panelists with us that we have with us today. Big round of applause for them. Well, we will begin with this first panel, like just like our host said, it requires the function of legislation, and we will take advantage of this space to formulate some questions that surely the panelists will start organizing themselves for their answers and giving their vision for each one of them. And we propose that this quick questions will be like such that come from this document that we gave you, how to potentiate and accelerate the input that the parliament have in the creation and maintenance of a clean environment that is also healthy and sustainable, where humanity can live in harmony with nature. What have been or could be the input that the parliament can give in the legislation or standards, how to approve budgets that are more committed to for conservation, and how the supervision of the national environmental commitments and international agreements, including the financing of the climate legislations in the global south, how to articulate the representation with anticipatory policies that are inclusive and for a just transitions, what other actions can be deployed from the parliament environments, and what would be the recommendations as a common voice from the parliaments and the interparliamentary institutions in the 13th COP 30 for November 2025 in Belém, Pará, Brazil. This is as an example of a question. Surely the panelists will articulate their presentations, but it's important to have a perspective about this. And for that, we will begin with the first panelist, Mr. Juan Pablo Letelier, who is the director of the Institute of Governance of the Andean Parliament, economist of the Georgetown University, United States, with a master in economy and international policies from Mexico, researcher of the Latin American Transnational Institute, elect director of the Center of Studies for the South American Peace Commission, 1989. Deputy for 4 periods, and being the vice president at the Chamber of Deputies Senator in 2 periods, and also being the vice president of the Senate in Chile, part of the Andean Parliament as well, and the executive interparliamentary and member of the Latin American Human Rights Association. Mr. Letelier, the floor is yours. Well, good afternoon to everyone. In fact, I had a presentation. I don't know if you can help me, but it won't serve much for what I want to say. Up to this date, the debate about climate change is a debate of the governments. I don't want to offend anyone, of the bureaucracy, of the chancellors, and the specialists are the same ones that come from one government to another, that go to the COP meetings, that help the presidents and the ministers of environment, and some of the people that work in the ministries of the environment. These are the representatives of the multilateral politics or policies, and the parliament members never have been asked for their opinion. Sorry, to be fair, they are offered, they are told, there is a treaty, you may vote pro or anti, but because it cannot be changed. The parliament action, the political action until now, has this as the background. I will go through this quickly. Look, climate change is the biggest crisis that affects humanity. It is threatening our survival as a species. There is no other species on the planet that damages its own environment. Only we do that. And the main cause is because we included the greenhouses in volumes that are increasing. This is what is changing the patterns of temperature, barometry, and it's creating climate change. Next. I don't know who has the pointer. Next. It's this very important, the importance of international treaties. It exists. What can be said is that since Rio, since the 92 in Rio, that's when we started talking about this legislative and the Paris Agreement. Maybe these are the two most important milestones for the debate of environmental legislation. Before that, there was not a great debate. We had this first wave of environmental legislation, which are the laws of environment in general that regulate the investment and the mitigation that should be done through the projects. The second wave of legislation has to do with the circular economy legislation. It has to do with the Paris Agreement, reduce, reuse, recycle standards, and what some have done in some countries copying in Europe, laws for the responsibility of the companies that have the responsibility to gather back part of their waste. This is part of the legislation that we have seen in our countries, more or less successful. The other one is the law of climate change, neutrality in emissions, where we set the goals for 2050 to be carbon neutral. And then we have the fourth wave that has to do with the Glasgow Agreement for the reduction of methane emissions. This has been the three waves of evolution in legislations. Next one. In Latin America, we have been doing our homework, meaning we are good students. They tell us do some laws, we do them. Little by little, all of our countries have legislations about the investments. Almost all of us have laws about climate change nowadays. Very important, where the objective is to reduce emissions, carbon neutrality, meaning we are only talking about emissions of fossil fuels. And then we have many laws for circular economy. Next.
Brazil has their legislation. Mexico has a good legislation on paper. Chile, they all have a focus. So we're all doing our work. We have legislation about the circular economy. Countries are minimizing waste. They are efficiently using resources. Guatemala is implementing the legislation that it is mandatory to separate waste in organics. So we are making progress. We are talking about reusing and recycling. And my apologies for the example, but every time men buy a shirt, the value of the plastic and the packaging and the cardboard is worth more than the shirt itself. That is absurd of the packaging policy, but things are changing. There are successful examples of legislation, meaning that there are some good laws, some other are more advanced, some are better, but it's good to be up to date in these matters. It is very important, but it does not fix the problem. Next. We have obstacles to make progress. There is a lack of awareness. There is ignorance. There is ignorance. There is insufficient education in this matter. And let's talk about the moment we're living in right now. And I want to talk about methanol. Methane. According to the Paris Agreement, we were supposed by now to be at point 1. So we failed. There's no way to meet that objective. The negotiators around the world 2 years ago started talking about fossil fuels in the latest COP. Before, they didn't even mention fossil fuels. That means that the parliaments have not been a part of this debate. We are good to make comments and to give speeches and to say that there are things that have to be done, but now we have to go into action. And to understand it, when parliaments have reacted, there are success stories. Some of you may remember about the ozone hole. Why are we not talking about it anymore? Have you ever wondered? Because that was an amazing planetary action that caused the Montreal Agreement, that caused the elimination of those sprayers. They were eliminated. So if humankind comes to an agreement, we can face the climate challenges. The Montreal Agreement caused the elimination of those chlorofluorocarbons. That means that this was successful. Next, the commitment to methane. Let me tell you this. There are 3 sources of methane. 3. Garbage, that our landfills in Latin America are open. In Europe, there are no open field landfills. There is an industry, there is infrastructure, and they're used to produce energy. We have livestock, where there's no management policies for manure, and third is the energy industry. So what do I mean? What am I proposing? Methane has an impact in public health, not only the environment. Methane captures 80 times more heat than CO2. Some scientists say 86 times more. A scientist stated that it is mandatory to legislate about methane today, this decade, because that's the only possibility to see a change in our lives. About climate change. Why? Because methane will dissipate in 10 or 12 years. CO2 takes centuries in dissipating from the atmosphere. The only possibility to see short-term effects is to reduce methane. So what do we need to do? Parliaments need to legislate. That's our only job, legislating. We can propose bills about methane emissions. Absolutely, yes. The NDCs that governments are proposing in Brazil, they're going to say, this is our proposal. But how many were consulted in Congress? From those, which ones have methane goals? This is something we have to present to Congress and to parliaments, and they have to include methane. What happens with the other sectors? In energy, in agriculture, in landfill, in water treatment. We have to establish by law an obligation to report emissions. Second, to receive an external certification, and to have a mandatory reduction plan. Parliaments have the authority to present this. Absolutely. You need agreements with the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Tax and parliaments have a lot to do in terms of legislation. We don't rely on governments to do so, but we have to step out of our ignorance and understand that this is urgent and that methane is more urgent in short term. Thank you very much, Mr. Letelier. You know, in Uruguay, there are 4 cows for every person, so that is an important challenge. Anyways, it is our tradition, and some other countries can teach us lessons about fake meat, so we also have to explain the nature in which our country was born. So let's go over to our second panelist, and I want to apologize for not saying this. Each panelist will have 8 minutes, but I'm saying it now, so I'll give the floor now to Lois Pace, Regional Director of the International Federation of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent Moon, former Secretary of World Affairs and former President and Director Executive of the Global Health Council, member of the COVID-19 board of the Biden-Harris administration, with more than a decade of experience working in Africa and Asia, with a BA from the University of Stanford, MBA in Human Rights from the University of Hopkins in United States, with active participation in different committees and boards focused on equality and inclusion. Ms. Pez, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. General Secretary and deputies and parliaments. Thank you for opening this space for dialogue. It may not be usual to see the Red Cross sitting in a panel like this, in a legislative panel. We are more known because of wearing the vest on the field and for helping in the middle of a flood or a drought or mudslides. But today we are here because we work to design a future where the population is safe. You design laws. We work on humanitarian action. And if there's something we have learned after a century of experience, is that our work is deeply connected. Because just like the Red Cross serves as a bridge in the middle of chaos, logistical and emotional bridges, you can serve as legislative bridges with norms that protect and anticipate, that can generate the conditions to take action before an emergency happens. These bridges and these norms are built in times of peace and stability, but it's in time of crisis when they serve their purpose, which is reducing the risks of climate change, so that they don't become disasters that make even more severe poverty and inequality. In this framework, I would like to share with you 3 recommendations that the Red Cross has considered are key to have legal frameworks that can benefit the adaptation to climate change, which is a threat that can cause more than 200 million people to need humanitarian aid in the next 25 years. The first recommendation is to reflect in legal instruments the multi-risk nature of climate change, the extreme temperatures, fires, movements of populations, and epidemics related to climate change. They all affect all aspects of society. Therefore, the legislative response has to be coordinated, both nationally and locally. The adaptation to climate change has to be approached with norms created specifically for that purpose. But we can also build plans. We can also build upon existing plans and budgets, for example, for health, for social well-being, for trade, and for transportation. The more coordinated the ecosystem with the government is, the better will be our collective capability to respond and to protect. But when it's about creating specific legislation for adaptation, it has to be visionary and it has to benefit the proactive focus before the reactive focus. This is the second recommendation. Creating smart climate norms. This means betting on frameworks that not only reduce existing risks, but that anticipate new risks. Frameworks that learn from the past and that prepare for the future. This can be achieved with scientific and technological knowledge, with specialized organizations and the voices of the population exposed to the risks linked to the climate. Also favoring the implementation of success stories such as early alert systems or digital communication. These initiatives can be developed as part of your climate contribution or the NDCs. Therefore, the country legislation is not an individual effort, but it's a channel to join the global efforts that will translate political commitments into national, tangible, and sustainable realities. And under that same logic, we encourage you to develop multi-country initiatives and trans-border initiatives. In the Red Cross, we are driving an alliance for the Amazon that aims to strengthen health and resilience of indigenous communities in the face of climate risks. And this is about an effort that coordinates key stakeholders of the territory and the state. And you're all welcome to join. Why are we together in this effort? Because we want to reduce the impact of the climate crisis. And this leads me to my final recommendation. Always count on the Red Cross whenever it's necessary. The states that you represent have in the Red Cross a unique partner with a mandate that no other organization or agency has, helping the public in the humanitarian sector. We can support you in the development of early alert initiatives and preparedness for response, and for the design of norms for disaster risk management related to the climate. Your countries can also benefit from our emergency fund for disaster response. It has been recognized by the COP 2028 as an effective instrument to respond to climate emergencies. The threat has allowed us to save lives in several contexts, especially when it's combined with an anticipatory action. Only in 2024, the draft invested more than $100 million in response and preparedness for crisis, most of them linked to climate crisis. And finally, and being aware of the critical role of the Red Cross, we encourage you to protect your humanitarian mandate. Having legal frameworks that allow us to operate in an effective and relevant way is determinant to save lives. The Red Cross is an NGO. It's not a private association and it's not a charity. It's a unique organization whose existence is possible only because of international regulations that allow us to work with you and your governments. Protecting its legal role, it's not only an act of institutional recognition, but it's also indirectly a concrete way of facing the effects of the climate crisis and strengthening the local capabilities of response and preparedness. And I will close by thanking you for your invitation, and I want to repeat our commitment to continue working by your side. We have been supporting for decades more than 90 countries strengthening their legal frameworks. And we do it because we understand that it's an obligation. And we're clear that the law is an essential component of the state of right in the face of climate change. You know this better than me. More than technical norms, these are decisions with a deep human impact. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being the Parliament generation that left behind the reaction to disasters to become in the generation that knew how to anticipate. The Red Cross will support you designing a future, but it begins today in this location with your legislative commitment and with our will. We are committed with you to serve the population that need it the most.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Pace. Now we invite Mr. Fitzgerald Cantero, also from Uruguay, Director of the Latin America Energy Organization, OLADE, ex-Director of Study and Projects in OLADE, postgraduate in Political Science, Master in Administration and Advanced Management of Projects with a Marketing Master, 20 years of trajectory in Uruguay, ex-president of the electrical market of Uruguay, and like we were saying today in the beginning, was also a member of the parliament during 10 years in Uruguay, so he knows what it's like to be on this side. Thank you very much. I must say that I felt very much identified with the words of the chancellor. Also, I want the Piali, my second last name. Also, my mother will also tell me, why didn't they mention my last name? This is the reason why we use two last names. So, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, for creating this type of events. This is vital. This is fundamental for any process and public policies production. In my case, it has to do about energy and what an energetical agenda means at a regional and country level, at the level of trying to find solutions and mitigation for the effects of climate change. The role of the parliament is fundamental. It's vital. It's essential. It's like the spine of the public policy. We can't move forward in public policy if we don't have a legal framework that enables it, an institutionality that allows those policies to develop a governance that says how that execution will be. a way in which that public policy will be financed, a way in that public policy will be developed, its impact, its scope, and its reformulation, or to continue working. We highlight a lot, of course, nowadays energy is fundamental. Usually we don't realize it until we have a blackout or we have different circumstances. When there's a blackout, that's when we realize the importance of the energy. In the meantime, common people are just in their day-to-day work, and they don't really think about how it's distributed, how it gets to us. Unfortunately, we've seen in the last times this blackouts, they constitute very serious situations, and I will start with the human. We have lost lives. We just saw this in Europe, in Spain, and we have also seen this in our Latin American regions. People that depend from this energy or that are electro dependent, and this there's a blackout and it impacts. And let's not even talk about economical losses. And also, we need to try the impact in the environment to be the less possible. I want to establish two or three things that I think are fundamental. I think that the function of the representation of the legislation and of the chancellor, the that you as legislators have the three functions that are fundamental when you develop public policies about energy aspects. I will begin with legislation. We have seen many success cases in the region where the policies of energy must be a state policy. From public policy, it must become state policy. And sorry about this, but Uruguay is one of these examples, and we were mentioning along we consolidated a state policy along energy policies, and that for whoever needs to sit down and design that public policy is very important, because of course the governments have their own nuances, they have their accents. Where will they put more in renewable for wind power, for solar power? That's good, that's okay, but the common vision of where are we heading is fundamental, because definitely that ensures us many things. It ensures the attraction of investment, so important for all of this, because all of this that we are talking about requires a lot of investment. It was being mentioned, our executive secretary, the potential that it has to continue growing. For example, in renewables, thousands of millions of dollars of investments will be required. All this electrical mobility and artificial intelligence, or the use of the energy, that it's more and more important and will continue to be. The world demands energy, especially electrical energy, and clean energy will require a lot of investment. And to attract that investment, or for that to become sources of employment in our countries, it needs to have a legal framework of clear policies that needs to go through the parliament. It's important for them to put it into the agenda and implement it. And at the same time, the public policies needs a framework, legal framework, that it must be very broad, because there's something, the technology goes faster than our laws. You're legislators and you know it. We know it as well, that sometimes reality goes way faster than the parliament discussions. And so we have this proposal for a law. I don't want anything to be changed about it, but the reality is different, and then we need to have conversations, speak to all the parties, and need to move forward with that institutionality that legislation requires. Therefore, since the technology goes faster and there's the advancement that at the end benefits our countries, legislation must also go hand in hand with that speed. And that's very complicated. How do we do that? Well, the executive powers need broad legal frameworks that through their executive units can apply those national plans, those national laws so important to develop, but it cannot be a blank check. We can't say to the executives, okay, do whatever you want. No, there is a legal framework, and that's where the second important function comes in to play, and that is the auditor or controller, and that needs to look into detail everything that will be implemented. And also something that's vital, one of the permits that was mentioned by the previous speaker, is about the social license. There is a lot of work to do in terms of regulation and permits. If we go and install a project in a region, it can be a wind power park, it can be whatever. We will need the approval of the land use, a lot of approvals and requirements, etc. But it also needs the approval of the community, of that social license, that the place where it's going to be integrated, that the people will there know what's going to be installed, what impact will it have, that they can make it their own, and that it can contribute with employment to that area. And for that, the representation is vital. For that, the legislators that are neighbors of this project, it's fundamental. They can bring the authorities, bring in the technical specialists, and explain what it's about. And we can have many examples of this. The most important thing is the hydrogen that has been with so much talked about, and how is water going to be used, how it will affect the pollution. There's a lot to do, but the parliaments, let's say, have a lot to do. And in these 37 seconds that I have, maybe I will continue afterwards, is local governments. It's that interconnection, that coordination among local government, parliament, and legislative and executive are very important in order to move forward these policies that will become a guarantee of the energy and to arrive to everyone as clean as possible. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fitzgerald. Now we will pass the floor to Deputy Luis Morlotte Rivas, Vice President of the Commission of Education and Culture, Science, Technology, and Environment of the National Assembly of Popular Power Cuba, Municipality of Santa Clara, Municipality of Villa Clara, Communist Party of Cuba member, and active in Cuban television. Marta Breu de las Villas University, studied journalism and started in local radio. Ex-president of the Union of Writers and Artists of Cuba, professor of the Marta Breu de las Villas University, and a National Award of Cultural Journalism, Jose Andres de Castro. Thank you very much, and I want to thank the PARLATINO for being the space where we can have this so very important dialogue about this essential topic facing the climate topic. We bring a group of ideas that we developed from the experience that we have in Cuba with the legislative function. As you all know, Cuba is an insular state, very threatened by climate change, just like all of the nations in the Caribbean that share with us that singularity. Cuba has demonstrated internationally a commitment with sustainable development and with the conservation of biodiversity, consolidating a legal framework in its National Assembly and popular power. Starting with this legislative period through two legislative initiatives that started from the communities, we worked in two laws that were approved by the National Assembly, Law 150 of Natural Resources of Environment, and Law 155, which is a novelty because it's around the protection of patrimony, and that was approved in 2021 in an extraordinary session of the legislative order. With this new instrument that we already have, the Cuban Parliament did an important contribution in defense of the environment, highlighted mechanisms of implementation and alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to say that our Constitution, Article 16, that we approved in 2019, expresses that the environment is a duty of the state and a human right, and that we must really institute policies to work in a normative body that has as basis those groups of public policies that the country must prioritize. Among them, sustainable planning with environmental policies, the participation of the community and guaranteeing to these communities like the participatory decision making and institutional, especially we have a science, technology, and environment ministry, the culture, and other actors of civil society that are very important. This is all reflects in the laws approved in 2022 that were debated. Maybe in later we can speak more about the popular participation that is very important when we're legislating. Law 150 of the System of Natural Resources and Environment establishes the regulatory framework for the rational management of Cuban ecosystems with key actors that have to do with precaution and not regression for actions that will impact negatively the environment. The common responsibility, but differentiated without distributing obligations among state citizens and corporations. Circular economy that our brother, the senator from Chile, that promotes the management of resources and to minimize the waste. A second principle that has to do with the economical instrument and sanctions, the green taxes for pollutions and for industrial emissions, for example, and projects for restoration. We have a great project in the Zapata mangrove and wetlands, and also different penalties for harm to the environment, and something that's very aligned with a state plan for facing the climate change that we called it life task. This is a study that determines in an exact way how the sea level will be rising in coastal populations that are already threatened, and we have had to try to find measures, the protection to coastal vulnerable areas, and of course the use of renewable energy. To this law, we accompanied with the 155 for protection for the natural patrimony. And since the year 59, we had a law that only state the cultural heritage, and we wanted to incorporate this patrimony, this heritage, the protection of the natural patrimony with a vision of conservation that's integrated the patrimony and declaring the protected areas in national parks were Alejandro Humboldt and the historical center with priority areas in the case of the environment, the existence of ecosystems that are very important, protection of the extraction activities by UNESCO. That is in one of the articles, and mechanism of participation, public consultations for protected areas, the tourists, for example, sustainable development locally, the NGOs and other societies in Cuba that have to do with the conservation of native species, and also the possibility that we have had these two teams for this that work parallel in a parallel way and in consultation with the citizenship that has created synergy with these laws, starting from the environmental impact that need to integrate fragmented ecosystem, and in a self-critical way in the implementation of these two important laws that have to do with the preservation of the environment in Cuba, and that presents, we must say that we have identified financial limitations that can create difficulties, especially for effectively monitoring what we have proposed with traditions in economical sectors that has been mentioned here against agricultural culture and conservation of soils, more participation in local governments to apply the laws, and more as allocation of resources and an effective massive education in schools that will start even earlier, and searching for international cooperation projects that Cuba has, that and UDP for example, UNDP for example, cooperation that we have some experience. We have also made an important contribution towards a sustainable development model, both the law 150, which are public, you can see in the website of our assembly, and the law 155, protection to the natural and cultural patrimony, has been a reference. That doesn't mean that we don't have the challenge of its compliance. And this is not only a constitutional demand, but the participation of the community and the climatic resilience. With this, Cuba demonstrates that neoliberalism doesn't go along with conservation, and its pillars that the National Assembly has consolidated in its legislative agenda. These are some of the experiences that we wanted to propose. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rivas. And next, we're going to give our panelists, following the same order, a second turn to complement their presentations and to answer some of the comments from the other colleagues of the panel. But because of time, you will have only 4 minutes. There it is. That way we can adjust the schedule due to the initial delay we experienced. So, Mr. Juan Pablo, the floor is yours again. Creating an alliance for climate action and for a just transition is an invitation to go from diagnostic to take action. And we need to take action, but first we need to prioritize. Let me give you an example of how the North is telling us that there's a lot of money for compensating and for mitigating, but they tell us to countries like Chile, deforest, and in Cuba they say, look after the mangroves. But if we know how to look after the mangroves and plant, we just need capital to invest in real infrastructure. I can give you an example. Landfills nowadays is an extreme source of contamination and emissions, but it could be a source of energy. In legislative matters, we need to push for similar laws. The energy industry has to be monitored, and they have to certify their emissions. In none of our countries do we have monitoring systems or information system, real information. The cattle. The problem is not to stop eating meat. In the world, we need to produce more protein. A lot of people are not achieving the appropriate consumption of protein, but we have to use science. Now there are supplements that can help us reduce more than 35% of the methane emissions of cattle. But if we don't propose it at Congress, nobody will do it. It is cheaper for the state to purchase the supplements than expenses that we have in health due to respiratory illnesses. So that is my invitation to the Parliament. If we want to create an alliance, let's make this happen. Let's listen to the other countries. Let's listen to what Mr. Martin Chung-Hong said at first. We need to present common initiatives similar initiatives so that we can see the changes. The COP30 is coming. Latin America should be thinking about where are we going to place our priorities. And personally, I think that methane emissions and greenhouse gases emissions is where the parliaments can contribute. The governments have to make investments in infrastructure and they have to take other types of actions. So let me give you one example. Food banks. Nowadays, a third of the food we produce in our countries is wasted. It goes to landfills and it produces methane. And it's mainly because of expiration dates. Businessmen would have, it would be easier for businessmen to donate than voting. Why do we vote? Because of our tax system. If they donate, they have to pay for taxes. If we change the norms in our countries, we can create food banks, we can prevent emissions, and we can fix relevant social problems. I work in the Andean Parliament Institute, and we have created an initiative guide that can be used in our countries to approach these matters. Because something that we need as parliaments is technical support to prepare laws, and it's not always available. Thank you. Thank you. The floor is yours. 4 minutes. Allow me to speak in English. Okay, thank you. We have interpretation.
Much less formal in my native tongue. I want to say a few things in response. First, I'm sitting here with a lot of emotion knowing that we are entering hurricane season. And it's a time that we all know is fraught with quite a few challenges, especially this year when we are working in an environment as humanitarians where we have less access to the resources we need to fight these disasters. And so I cannot emphasize enough how critical it is for us to be taking this action ahead of time, doing what we can to mitigate these disasters, because the people most affected might not recover in the way that they have in the past. And I want to talk more about those communities, those people. We've had mention of vulnerable populations, which is quite important. And one group of people that tends to be forgotten are people on the move, are people who migrate within countries, between countries. And it's important, it feels important to shine a light on that community, knowing that they are facing multiple challenges. They're facing the need to find home and safety amidst potentially being displaced due to a climate disaster. And so it makes our job more complicated when we are considering so many risks, so many challenges at one time, but we cannot give up our work. We cannot stop fighting to make progress in this space because the challenges are only becoming more complicated. They're only becoming harder to face. I think the last thing I want to really emphasize as well is the opportunity for PARLATINO and for parliamentarians, leaders across this region to lead. I think we heard it earlier during the opening as well. There is now such a battle for multilateralism, for progress, for collaboration, for solidarity. We're not only talking about climate change. We're talking about what it looks like to come together as a community and make any change that's required to protect people and to save lives. And with so much of the world questioning whether we should do this type of work, we have an opportunity and even an obligation to come together and try and drive this. And I believe we can do it. I believe that there's an opportunity to show the world how much the Americas, how much Latin America and the Caribbean in particular can lead and have been leading, especially given our understanding of what's at stake and the communities that we see and speak with every day and who we know have the most to lose if we fail. So I applaud everyone coming together around this issue. I know that I will do my work as regional director of the Federation of Red Cross to ensure people know this work is happening. And like I said earlier, please count on us as your partners in this space because we know that we can't do it alone, but we also know that we can be successful if we come together. Thanks.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pace. All right, sir, you have 4 minutes. In the previous engagement, we talked about several needs, investments. And in the last few minutes, I would like to talk about information and training. I think that there is an important work we have to do about informing the population about the different developments. The role of the parliament is essential, not only for action, but also to explain why certain things are happening. Look at what happened April 28th in Spain. We're still discussing today what could be the causes. There are some hypotheses on the table. So what did we see? We saw Spain going to parliament, and we saw their technical reports and how the government understood of how that cause. But we not only need to understand the cause, but what can we do to prevent it? And amongst those transitions and these important panels, we have to wonder, what else can we do for this transition to take place without interrupting supply, without running out of energy in some of our countries? And there is a specific cause, but there are others like droughts or floods, because when we have matrices that are relying on the hydro energy, both the excess and the lack of water can complicate energy generation. But it is essential to have information and training of the government agencies, both executive and legislative. And I want to make an announcement or a dream that we have. And again, we want to thank you for this invitation, because we have been talking to the PARLATINO, trying to find a way to offer the possibility of courses or trainings or workshops, whatever you want to call it, related to energy for legislation. So I'm proposing this because it's good to continue having these discussions amongst ourselves and to continue making progress. This is essential because we need, every time that there's a specialist or an executive to a parliament, legislators must have in their toolbox of technical components the possibility to ask questions and take legislative action that is consistent with what the reality needs. And this is essential in multiple areas. Let's talk about energy mobility, electric mobility. If we see those CO2 matrices, we see that transportation is the most contaminant. There is where we have to apply public policies to mitigate that CO2. So we can think of public policy for a specific country that needs a specific legislation. But we need to think of that mobility not only as a country, but also as a region. Therefore, and that's why the initiative of Caribbean and Latin American Parliament is essential. Legislation has to be looked at from the region.
Infraestructura de recarga de vehículos que tiene que ver con normativa, que tiene que ver con una cantidad de cosas que podríamos charlar.
The example that I gave you has to do with so many things, so much infrastructure and vehicles, but we have to look at it not only at the national level, but at the regional level to find a roadmap to decarbonize the transportation sector, not only one country, but all region. Thank you, Fitzgerald. Your 4 minutes. Thank you. I agree with what our panelists mentioned this afternoon. It is important that the Parliament has proposed this alliance. First, because more than legislating about our own parliaments directly in some countries or some governments, at least is a call for attention for the entire region about the urgency of these matters, because this is related to survival. I think that the question was proposed somehow by the chair of the table. The questions that we have to wonder these 2 days is how we as parliaments, regardless of your political party, how can we enhance and protect and defend the environment? What else can we do? That is a question we all have to ask ourselves. Wherever field we work, whether it is legislative, social, or public, here we have to legislate, but we also have to raise awareness. And we have to design those laws, but we also have to enforce them. Somehow, as legislators, we also have to educate, because we have the newer participations to participate so that they can be aware of the extreme moment of our planet that we are living. I remember a summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. In a quick speech, the commander Fidel said something that moved the world. He said, "There's an important species that is at risk of disappearing because of its natural conditions of living and because of man. So today, we're putting at stake the existence of human beings. Therefore, we have to work faster to mitigate the threats that we have today for the environment." We, in the experience we've had in recent laws that were approved after a process of public dialogue, we almost did a referendum. We had debates with communities, neighborhood, online, and we received more than, and this is a lot for our population, but more than 5,000 comments from people asking to include more severe punishment in our laws for what we were proposing to prevent climate change. But more importantly is we came to schools and the dialogue was very interesting with children and adolescents, because we were able to see how they see the world. And that's how we came up with new ideas after hearing the proposal of boys, girls, and adolescents, after going through contests and hearing their scientific and artistic performances. But we have to see this from the community, not only at the global level, but we have to empower the community and the actors of the community with solutions that may not be a country solution, but can help the community, and that will improve the conditions of the environment in that place. I always say that there are countries where some territories will disappear because of climate change. Like he said, we don't have a planet B. We have to fix our planet using our competences. And this is very urgent, and I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation. Great. Thank you, Mr. Rivas. So let's do the following. we had prepared some questions from the audience, but because of time, we're going to ask you, to whoever wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll give you a mic, but we will answer the questions at the end. Otherwise, we will never leave tonight. So we will give the floor to the legislator so she can ask the first question. If there are any other questions, we are going to write them down.
Hola. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Ahora Violeta Marcuchipas. It's 3 topics. I will be very, very, very brief. I wanted to know if you, as Parliament members, have studied the possibility of creating a law that's mandatory for all of the countries that include the Caribbean and Latin America for environmental education, but not only environmental education that any teacher can give, but that it would be given by professionals, and for that we must obligate the universities for them to have a title in environmental education. In the case of the Caribbean that have so much potential in tourism, it could be linked to ecotourism. That's one. Why I said I have an experience of 7 years in Venezuela, giving environmental education as one of the lectures given during 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for many hours a day, and they had very positive effects for conservation. I think the only Parliament member that has mentioned this, and forgive me, is Mr. Morlete that spoke about environmental education in Cuba. I don't know if it could be that way. The other thing I wanted to say is if you had presented the possibility that the consumers in transportation could pay a tax that would go directly into replanting or foresting in each country. Meaning, if I fly 1 hour, that has $5 tax for methane, and with those $5 that goes to the greenhouses to replant. I wanted to ask about this, and if you had thought about the technological advancements in communication, how it creates the fusion in communication of the bees, and if you have thought about a study where the technology that's in advance would diminish that problem because the work that the bees does. I don't know if you know, but the bees with the cell phones with transmissions, the radiation, it diminishes the communication between the bees in order to go back to their homes. That would be all. Thank you, and congratulations for all these events. That it's a shame that it's so little of us that are interested. Just adding back, Mr. Martinez. Yes, I simply wanted to know about the vision of the panelists in terms regarding the civilizatory model or the civil model. We are looking for different energetic alternatives or for production models, but we tend to for the population to be more urban, to concentrated in cities and abandon the rural areas, and that generates, I think, as well, a series of externalities and problems that are the ones that we are seeing today. and more is becoming more industrialized, and more people are left in the matrix of food production, and the rural areas are getting empty, and the cities are more full. And I think that's a challenge also that we must explore. Any other legislator that would like to ask another question before passing the floor to the panelists, simply in representation of the PARLATINO, having the presence of Venezuela does not dictate binding laws for the countries. We issue framework laws that each country can adapt depending on their realities. The proposal is that along their 60 years, the Latin American Caribbean Parliament has been generating. In fact, in the last few years, both our assembly as the main board has approved the 13 commissions, what the 13 commissions have been working on. Yes, there is one about environment, there is different parts, but they are not mandatory for the countries. It's part that has this particularity. We'll just clarify because this was precisely a question directed towards PARLATINO. For the others, thank you very much. I would like to comment on what my colleague from Uruguay was mentioning. I think that what you were mentioning is very key. There is data from the World Bank that speaks about the percentages of people living in cities, and in 2050 it will be around 70%. 7 out of 10 people will be living in cities. That generates an amount of challenges. The lack of population in the countryside, for example, it's something very similar to what happened in Spain. I was looking at a report where in Spain they say they are having a discussion because of the production of the olives has been taken out to put in solar panels. And we have a discussion about the land use. Is land used to eat or to generate energy? And it's a discussion where the parliament cannot be absent, of course. And it's good that those discussions put into the legislative agendas, but also the challenges of how are we going to live in the cities? Everything that entails, everything that means to have what we call smart city, everything that has to do with technology, with energy, is going to play a role of how the municipalities in each country. So I wanted to touch upon those topics very briefly because I think we didn't talk about it before, and I think it's fundamental to put that into the agenda. And I only mentioned this challenge, but there are many other challenges in terms of how the cities are organized, the territories, and how the day-to-day life of people interact with the development of their activities, mobility, and nothing less than the production of food, even beyond the cows that we care so much about. But it's necessary to analyze and generate public policies that adapt to that is already there, but that we know that will continue to be there with all these projections. Mr. Maloto Rivas. Thank you. Afterwards, we can even talk more about this topic if you want, but I would only like to make a comment about what you were saying, directly related, I understand, with education and how we usually work on that environmental topic. As in Cuba, since 2017, we have a government program called Tarea Vida, or Life Task. There is a section in this Tarea Vida program, everything related to programs for education, how to include within the mandatory education, the curriculum, the environmental aspect, and how to develop it starting from that conception, from its conception, how it incorporates Cuban legislation in that Tarea Vida program, especially the awareness in new generations, which is something really very important because in this world of predators, the child is adapted to consumption, and many times it leaves little time for reasoning in that globalization of the market of what really consists. Like Letelier was mentioning the shirt that we buy, that it's not reasonable. What goes along with that product that is necessary for life? How to bring the attention, since it starts in the primary school, how to bring it into the mid education and even to university. There's interesting experience in universities. How we must insist and promote important university members in diverse careers, because it's multifactorial. We need to see it from the scientific research and also for social science. How can we make a course for master degrees, PhD, to be focused on this topic? And we have insisted a lot, especially in the culture and training, a group of editorials that will publish critical texts about this topic that catch the attention, and everything to serve education. Just like you identified and said, this is a topic that we must win over in the education of new generations. If we don't start with this task of education, we will not make it. This is the second element that was certainly mentioned, and that I think is very important, your intervention, and also it has to do with communication. We must work a lot in communication. Right now, this is so volatile about the small members or the ones who think different. There's a cognitive war to think about how this environmental and survival topics of the species, which is the humankind, how can we create a dialogue with that kid that spends most of his or her time in the social media and in the media in general. And I think this is something we should think from the parliamentary standpoint. I think that it's obvious with the consultation, the consumption model that humanity has nowadays cannot take it anymore. The planet does not have the resources for everyone to have the consumption model that the ones that are here have. And we are not even the ones that consume the most, meaning there is a civilizatory problem. And I also want to say that the education of our young people is much better than ours. They already know that we have a problem. This is why women don't want to have kids. It's not a coincidence, because they understand that the world is different. And I believe, and forgive me, I am 100% on the side of education, how we generate sense not to go into the city, but nowadays to process the waste that we produce, each one kilogram and 200 grams per day, where the cost of it 70% is the transportation of that garbage somewhere to someplace, and we don't transform that waste into a resource. And what we need to do now is to act. All of us that are here today, we need to, yes, educate, yes, generate awareness. But if we think that those kids that or children that are 6 or 7 now, and they will change the world in 40 years, they will be late. The planet will not sustain itself anymore without action for the next 10 or 15 years. We need now, today, before 230 or 250, we need to decrease the methane emissions. because if to stop the rise of temperature, because if there's a rise temperature, the Red Cross has more work. It's dramatic what's happening with this all lack of resources. It will become even more dramatic. But what can the parliamentarians do? We cannot replace the Red Cross. We cannot replace the teachers, but we can generate initiatives, legal initiatives that will incentivize, give incentives in certain directions, so we cannot throw away the garbage without separating it. In fact, we must need to use electrical transportation, not based on fossil fuels. Obviously, the meat that we eat must produce less methane, but we need to do something about it for that to happen. No one can replace us. The legislators are the only ones that can promote these topics. There's nobody else. Thank you very much, Mrs. Space, to finish. Thank you again. Well, I agree with everything that you said, but I want to elaborate a bit more about communication and the importance of the public communication, because yes, it's good that we speak about this and that we agree on some things, but out there's lack of information, there's bad education, there are things that are challenges for us. So we also think about how to promote not only the opportunities or obligations, but also solutions. And what are we doing here? The public, the audience needs, the public at large needs to know about those solutions and how they can support us, I think. So along with the actions and answers or prevention, it's important to educate not only at schools, but also out in the streets, and with simple messages that can promote or educate and determine the future and how to collaborate among us to start. Thank you. Well, Juan Pablo Letelier, JC Pez, Fitzgerald Alcantero Piali, and Luis Morlote Rivas, it's been a pleasure. I want to thank you, all four of you, and congratulate you for your presentations in this parliamentary gathering. Thank you. Big round of applause. Thank you very much, Deputy Juan Martin Rodriguez, of course, our panelists, and thank you each one and every one of you for your participation in this first panel about auditing function. We also want to highlight Rolando Gonzalez Patricio, Mr. Chancellor Javier Martinez Echeverria, all of the authorities and all of you who are here with us. To remind you that tomorrow we'll continue with day, and of course you're all invited to continue speaking about this very important topic. To conclude, we invite you to now visit the exposition of good environmental practices that many companies located in Panama offer for us, and then we invite you all to the cocktail organized for the organism for all of you. This will be done in the lounge on the main lower floor. We'll see you all tomorrow.